Hello everyone, I'm Chatra and welcome to another episode of Money Talks right here on Anfield Index. We are in the midst of a transfer window and the summer of madness, one where Liverpool fans are experiencing levels of almost delirium due to the business that is being carried out by their beloved football club. And already we've got one deal over the line, as I record this, in Jeremy Frimpong, very exciting prospect who will potentially filling in at right back. And we're on the verge of securing deals over the next few days for Florian Wirtz and also Milos Kerkez. So very exciting additions to the squad, to a title-winning squad, no less, with the prospect of more incomings. This is something that Liverpool fans have really not gotten used to, I think, because for much of the last few years, we have been lucky to see perhaps two or three signings or more, never mind five or six. And let's not forget, Mamardashvili is an incoming for this summer, having had his deal essentially secured a year ago. So already we are at pretty much four incomings, five count the goalkeeper from Hungary, with the prospect of two or three more to arrive. So it has prompted a lot of discussion, a lot of debate, not only amongst Liverpool fans, but even rival fan bases about where is all this money coming from? How on earth is it that Liverpool, who are almost famous for not spending a huge amount, all of a sudden able to put down 100 million plus add-ons for Yates, and the potential for a very significant outlay on at least a centre forward this transfer window. So let's unpack it then. First of all, let's look at revenue. So Liverpool Football Club had, as you know, a very successful season. The campaign 24-25 will have generated for the club in the region of about £700 million. Some estimates put it slightly below, some slightly in excess of that. But whichever way you look at it, it will smash the club's turnover record. So it will be setting a mark that very few clubs in world football can and have achieved. On top of that, you have to look at the level of transfer debt, because that is something that is absolutely a factor when it comes to determining available funds. So if you look at some of our rival clubs domestically, they do carry a very significant amount of transfer debt. So as of the last financial year, when information is available, Liverpool ended 2023-24 with transfer debts of around £127 million, which sounds like a lot of money until you then consider the transfer debt of rival clubs. So next up was Manchester City at £230 million, and you might think, okay, well that's perhaps lower than you might have expected. That is because up until this January transfer window just gone, City hadn't spent huge amounts of money on incomings over the last couple of years. So that would explain why that is not as big as some of the clubs that I'm just about to come on to. Arsenal, who have spent quite significant sums to get back into the top four and then to try and challenge for the league title, at the end of 23-24, had transfer debt of £268 million. Spurs had an even greater level of transfer debt of £335 million. Manchester United, who release quarterly reports because of their them being a publicly listed company on the New York Stock Exchange, Their most recent set of reports that bring us up to the end of March 2025 revealed that their transfer debt at that point was £403 million. And last but certainly not least, Chelsea, who were sitting on transfer debt of £509 million at the end of 23-24. And obviously financed by essentially selling assets to themselves, most notably the women's team for £200 million. So Liverpool then, in terms of transfer debt, sitting on significantly less than its rivals. And of that debt, about 100 million or so was payable just after that reporting ended. So summer of last year, about 100 million of that would have been paid around that time, and that would have related to deals such as ones secured in 2022 for the likes of Darwin Núñez, which, as we know, was a significant outlay, as well as some of the transfer dealings in summer 23, where we brought in a quartet of new midfielders. However, beyond that, the transfer debt for this summer was significantly less, potentially around 25 to 30 million pounds. So were Liverpool not to be shopping around at all for any incomings, that is the extent of what would have been owing, which, when you put it in the context of figures of 400 and 500 million, as I've just reeled off for some of the rival clubs, is a paltry amount. So clearly that demonstrates that Liverpool did have scope to spend quite significantly on new signings. Then you have to factor in the wage bill. So yes, Liverpool's wage bill is amongst the highest in the Premier League, officially the second highest. It was 373 million if you exclude payments made to some of Jurgen Klopp's backroom staff. So that 373 million was the outlay for the end of 23-20 or the 23-24 season, and it would have been a higher amount for 24-25. Bonuses would have been paid out for the squad because of their title triumph, but also because of their return to Champions League football, which also incurred bonuses. So that wage bill likely topped £400 million, though when you compare that to 700 million of turnover, that's not too bad. And then you also have to consider the turnover that the club is expected to generate in 25-26. And my estimate, and also other football finance people estimate, that turnover could be in the region of £750 million. So incredible amounts of turnover being raked in by the club. And on top of that, we do know that Liverpool is in the process of moving on a number of players who between them could generate upwards of £200 million in transfer sales. So you're looking at the likes of Darwin Núñez, Harvey Elliott, Jarell Quansah, as well as potentially Luis Diaz even. There are links with him and clubs like Barcelona, one or two in Saudi. So though obviously many Reds would like to retain him for at least another season, it's certainly not something that can be ruled out that he could go. If he were to go, given his recent form over the last 12 months, the club clearly would be commanding a fee of 60, 65 million or more for that player. So therefore, on top of the funds that are generated by record-breaking revenues, there will also be record-breaking proceeds from player sales that the club can also generate, and therefore divert towards further incomings. PSR, that's another thing that can be of concern, and not for Liverpool Football Club. The club is, Chris Weatherspoon of The Athletic noted in one of his recent articles, the club would have to generate a loss of £75 million for the season just finished to be at risk of breaking the PSR limit and potentially experiencing some form of sanction. The club has no such worry. It will not only not generate a loss, it stands to generate a very healthy surplus, a profit. In the accounts for 23-24 player sales in the summer of 24, the club accounts reveal that a profit of £41 to £42 million would be recorded for 24-25. That's before we even talk about any of the other profits generated from record-breaking revenue. So the club will have returned back to making a profit in 24-25. So PSR is certainly not a concern either. So one of the questions that has been asked is, where was this money? Was this money available before? Why is it that the club hadn't been spending a great deal? It only spent £10 million essentially on one incoming last summer in Chiesa from Juventus, and even in some of the transfer windows prior to that, compared to rival clubs, relatively modest amounts were spent. But as I touched on earlier, right at the start, the level of transfer debt for Liverpool, because of that more conservative spending over recent years, is why the club is now in a position to spend very significant sums on incomings. So we know that we are expecting the Wirtz deal to be signed up and confirmed in full. 400 million plus 60 million in add-ons for Wirtz. We're also expecting the Kirkhead's announcement any day, and that is expected to be around 40 million, 45 million at most. So I expect that in reality that deal will probably be in the region of perhaps 30 to 35 million confirmed and guaranteed, with a fair chunk of add-ons to take it up to 40 to 45 million. The Frimpong deal we already know about. So all three of these deals will involve phased payments, installments, and that is typical of transfer deals. So the three deals that are about to be confirmed for those three players in terms of initial installments, we're probably looking at in the region of just over £50 million. The reports out of Germany suggested that installments for Wirtz could be around 20 million a year over 5 installments, not the typical 3. Whereas the deals for Frimpong and Kirkhead might be the more standard 3 installments. Now, in terms of whether there's front loading and greater amounts paid up front and then lesser over time is not known, but not unreasonable to assume that there might be equal installments. So with the Frimpong deal, and in terms of the guaranteed sum, we're perhaps looking at about 10 million for this summer. And then on top of that, the Kirkhead's deal could be around 10 to 15 for this summer. So with incomings as well, that are also being talked about, potentially another forward, potentially another midfielder, potentially another centre-back. The club won't be entirely dependent on player sales to facilitate those. However, it is fair to say that the club will be looking to now generate significant proceeds from sales, and that should fund further incomings. And I think that we could be looking at 2 to 3 more to come in. So let's talk about the biggest of those deals that has been generating an immense amount of discussion and debate in the last 24 to 48 hours. And that is for Alexander Isak, the prolific marksman for Newcastle United, arguably the most sought after striker that appears to be available in the open market this summer. So there has been talk that the player might be in the region of 120 to 150 million. I think that Liverpool will perhaps angle for a deal slightly in excess of the one that they've agreed for Yates. So I think that the Liverpool Football Club deal may be somewhere in the region of perhaps 110 guaranteed, with perhaps 15 million in add-ons to take it up to a total deal of 125. And they will hope that that will be enough to get that deal done for that player. I suspect that Newcastle will aim for slightly in excess of that. I mean, obviously, the public position will be that the player is not available. Obviously, they're going in for a Champions League campaign, and their most important forward is a player that they dearly like to retain. However, if the player is making noises about wanting out, and there seems to be increasing chatter that that is the case, then the club may be asking themselves, well, okay, would we rather have a player that's fully committed to our cause for the season of 25-26 onwards, or would we rather hang on to a player that has his desires elsewhere? And they may be thinking perhaps cashing in might be the right thing to do, because as we saw with Liverpool, going back some 7-8 years when they cashed in on their prize asset of Felipe Coutinho, that facilitated deals for a couple of unicorns that transformed the club into a top four club to Premier League and European Cup winners. So Newcastle may be similarly minded. They may be thinking, if we bring in 120, 130 million or more, that can secure several game changers for the club. You know, there's already been links between Newcastle and Ekitike, for example. So one of those, maybe one more in defence, another midfielder, and they could have a really, really strong squad going into the next campaign. And that is perhaps some of the discussion that is being had in the boardroom at Newcastle United. So if that deal were to transpire, would Liverpool be dependent on player sales, or could that be funded from the revenues that the club is generating? It potentially could be, but it'd be entirely dependent on the payment structure. So if Newcastle were open to a deal of, say, 125 million when their preference may be 150, then it might be on the proviso that a significant chunk of that is paid up front. So they may say, okay, we'll agree to that deal of 110, say, guaranteed, but only on the basis that maybe 60% of that is paid up front. And if that's the case, Liverpool may then have to put down, 50, 55, 60 million in order to make the deal happen. Now, if that were the case, I suspect Liverpool will almost certainly be dependent on player sales. And so therefore, there is now a bit of a waiting game to see, okay, well, what can we do first? Can we get some outgoings secured in order to then know what kind of deal we can propose as a structure in order to secure Isak? Now, if some of these deals don't quite transpire, then clearly the club appears to have some fallback options. So they may look at getting the Ekitike deal done if the Isak deal is impossible. They may look to Atletico Madrid and perhaps put a proposal forward for Alvarez. But again, that would be a very difficult deal to do, and the money that would be involved for that would not be dissimilar to the Isak deal. So if they wanted to go for a cheaper option, then they would probably be looking at Ekitike rather than Alvarez. And we do know that there appears to be some dialogue between the club and representatives of Ekitike. So that is, again, impressive. That is a lesson learned for Liverpool Football Club, that in the past they set their mind on one, maybe two players at most, and if those deals didn't transpire, they decided to hold fire and wait for the next summer. And even if they were waiting for the following summer, then that deal, whichever that they prioritized, may not have been quite so easy to achieve. And then again, the target may have been missed 2 summers running. So the club seems to be taking a more agile, that seems to be a smarter, cleverer approach to doing business. And let's make no mistake. Yes, the outgoings in terms of in terms of purchases may be the biggest for the club by some considerable margin by the time this transfer window slams shut in some 2.5 months' time. However, if they get the right business done, then the club is potentially looking at getting only minimum business done next summer and the summer after that. They may only be looking at perhaps getting in a couple of players at most in summer of 26 and in summer of 27. So if this is the big transfer window and with the right age profile, players that potentially could be delivering for years to come, there really wouldn't be the need to be getting in 4 or 5 players next summer, the summer after that, and even the summer after that. So I think that is the kind of long-term outlook. Yes, a significant outlay. Yes, a significant commitment. But if we get it right, this will set us up for a number of years, and trophies should come pretty much every single season for the next several. If this all come together and the plan all bears fruit. So exciting times for Liverpool Football Club. Exciting times for the fans of the club as well. So that is why there's a lot to be optimistic about. Finally, Liverpool appear to be operating like a true superpower. This is the giant of the game. This is a club that generates amongst the biggest turnovers, has one of the biggest wage bills. And yet, for too many summers, it didn't really seem to operate in the way that many of its rivals around Europe tended to. And that perhaps is why so many of its preferred targets over the last few years tended to end up elsewhere. Liverpool's track record when it comes to securing its preferred targets over the last 5, 6, 7 years hasn't been particularly great. Whereas now there seems to be a mood change whereby players are looking at the club thinking, this is a club with ambition. This is a club that's going places. This is a club with an exciting coach that has progressive ideas, very astute tactically as well. The fan base, goes without saying, is one that 99.9% of players would love to play for. A state-of-the-art stadium that still retains its heritage. There's so much to like about the club. There's so much to like about the whole project, and that's why I think Wietz has decided to go for Liverpool rather than opting for what may for years have been his preferred club, Bayern Munich, and even turning down Man City as well, who likely offered him a financially sweeter deal than Liverpool Football Club were able to. And if Liverpool also secure a marquee striker as well, then the message it sends to players who may be considering their futures for next summer, summer 27 as well, is that Liverpool is about as exciting a club to join, and there will be players and agents knocking down the door, wanting to get into the club in the way that we see for only 2 or 3 clubs in world football, like Real Madrid. So really, really exciting times, plenty to be optimistic about. But hopefully the breakdown that I've shared with you has given you some better understanding of why it is that Liverpool now are in a position to spend and spend big. So exciting times, as I say, and let's hope that we secure 2 or 3 more exciting prospects over the next few weeks. So we go into the 25-26 campaign as red hot favourites, not only for the Premier League, but also amongst the favoured clubs to secure a 7th Champions League / European Cup. So that's it from me. Thank you for joining, and join us again next time here on Money Talks.